Welcome to Narrative Responsibility, a podcast about examining the meta story of your life, how well it is serving you, and how to change it for the better. I'm Elena Wolf, relationship coach and life alignment mentor, and this is this week's New Perspective. Hi there. I'm so glad you're here today. This is episode 32. Talent versus skill. Or maybe I decided to call it Talent Does Not Exist. I don't know. As I'm recording it, I still haven't decided whether I'm using a clickbait title. Before we get into the topic, I just want to say I appreciate all your patience with me as I have inconsistent episode releases the last month or two. I think I've finally solved the recording space issue. I really hope I have, because it has been genuinely disheartening to find myself needing to record the same episode multiple times. It happened yet again. It's why there was no episode last week. The way my headset recorded captured a lot of mouth noise, and maybe it wasn't going to bother anyone else, but it was sure bothering me. And that's the kind of thing that can't really be edited out because it's occurring simultaneously with my speaking. And I just didn't have the time last week, because I was traveling, in order to re-record it yet again until I had had a chance to reset my recording space, fiddle around with my equipment, and get something that I think is a workable protocol, so that hopefully going forward, the only time I'm re-recording is because it was a bad script or I just completely flubbed the performance and not because of technical issues. So again, just wanted to acknowledge the inconsistencies and say thank you for hanging in there, and hopefully I have it solved and will just sound good going forward. Anyway, this topic of whether talent even exists is one that I have been talking about online for 18 years at least. And I will probably be talking about it until the day I die, because it's something I feel really strongly about and feel specifically highly qualified to talk about. I guess if I can persuade the entire world my way of thinking about it, then maybe I can not talk about it until I'm gone, but gotta start somewhere. So yeah. My very controversial opinion is that talent does not exist, and we should stop talking about it as if it did. I said it. Talent is not a real thing. It is a concept that we use to describe or explain a real phenomenon, yes, but it's a bad concept. By bad concept here, I mean it is first, an inaccurate representation of reality, and second, that it causes harmful belief structures, so it is therefore not a benign inaccuracy. I do recognize that the conceptual shorthands of language, like the abstract frameworks that we use to explain the things we experience, don't always completely capture reality. The symbol or the metaphor that becomes our word for something can sometimes lack fidelity and nuance. But in this case, the concept of talent creates a belief distortion that I think keeps a lot of people trapped in a self-limiting view of what's possible. See, the cultural concept of talent is that someone is naturally good at a certain thing, so they either don't need to train at it to be good, or they don't need to train as much as other people to be good, or they can do more with it than everyone else can. And in this conception of talent, it's an inborn quality. You have it or you don't. And I think conceptually, this misunderstands what it means to have a natural ability to do a certain thing well. In my view, the actual structure is more like a high capacity with certain types of cognition, and that leads to more time spent in those cognitive spaces, therefore greater skill development in those spaces than you would expect for that age or based on the average person's capacity and skill. When certain capacities are higher than average, there can be an asynchrony of development where this one aspect of a person is developed very highly or much more so than their chronological age would suggest. Talent could be considered a word for that type of asynchrony. And talent could also be considered a word for unexpected cognitive capacity. An unexpected level of cognitive capacity with something is also a recognition that human traits have a spectrum of presentations. Like there's a whole variety of ways something can manifest in people, and that means there will be an average level of capacity as well as above and below average capacities for all of the traits. Then there are also more common or less common constellations of traits. So some combinations of capacities are just going to be more common than others. So talent is a word that is basically a shorthand for above average capacity or possibly above average skill development. And honestly, better skill development is almost always inevitable if one has a bigger capacity for something. Let me offer an example or two. The first one is calling somebody good at jazz or talented at jazz. The actual underlying capacity is probably something like external pattern recognition and then pattern recombining or restructuring. So jazz would stimulate that cognitive ability, and the high capacity person would enjoy that stimulation, where a lower capacity person might find it stressful to try and listen to that many patterns and all the ways they're changing, or possibly even just find it so boring they won't listen to it at all. The high capacity person for that kind of pattern recognition and disruption goes back for more. They keep listening to jazz or learning to play in a jazz style. And the more they listen and or play, the more it hones their skill at applying that external pattern recognition disruption capacity. They don't have a talent for jazz per se. They have a high capacity for patterns, and jazz provides an applied use for that capacity. And because they have been practicing that cognitive capacity more than the average person for their whole life, they respond to the chance to apply it in a way that looks like being naturally good at that specific thing, in this case, jazz. But really, the person is naturally good at the cognitive capacity that underpins it, which is this pattern recognition. Another example might be for you to think of an athlete who is very good at multiple sports, and then they're presented with a new one and they seem to pick it up, quote, like a natural. Are they really a natural at that specific sport? Or is it that they have developed a high level of skill with things like knowing where their body is in space, being able to see the relative speed of an object to themselves, their own body, and maybe other players' bodies as well, and understanding the forces like gravity and friction that apply when a physical body is moving around, in space or manipulating an object. And because they have developed those skills to a high level, they're very natural on any athletic field, in any kind of game, and all they have to think about are the specific rules and strategies for this specific game. Compare that to someone who has maybe a lower capacity or a lower skill development with all that exteroceptive sense stuff, and that person has to be learning the physics and the coordination and the proprioception at the same time they're attending to the game and the strategies. Obviously, there's a huge element of advantage that the person who has trained as an athlete and has already developed those underlying skills, those underlying cognitions, is going to have. So talent is really just better skill development, often, but not always, due to a higher than average capacity for an underlying piece of cognition. Okay, so maybe it's a little bit pedantic to make a distinction between skill at the thing itself versus skill at an underlying cognition. You might even argue, like, yes, Elena, exactly, you just defined talent. It is an underlying capacity that allows for skill expression beyond what is expected. But the way the concept of talent affects our expectations is where the harm comes in, and why I think this distinction between being good at the thing itself and being good at something that underlies the thing or underlies being good at the thing itself is really worth making. So human minds have this system that calculates how hard we expect a task to be, and then it monitors how the task goes when we perform it. Our expectations affect how we experience the task. Those pesky meta-emotions I like to talk about. So if we believe a task will be hard, and it is hard, that's okay, because our expectations match our experience. But if we expect a task to be easy, and then we find it hard, we get really frustrated and disheartened. Maybe we even give up, because our expectations have been disappointed. You can make almost a Punnett square that predicts our reaction to a task based on, first, whether we think it will be easy or hard, and second, whether we find it easy or hard to actually do. So 2 of the squares, the expect it to be hard and get hard, and expect it to be easy and get easy, are going to land just fine for us psychologically. Our expectations match our reality. So we're probably not going to have a strong emotional or neurochemical response to either of these. Now, if we expect something to be hard and it comes easy, we get a huge dopamine rush from this because it's a windfall. It's something unexpected. So it feels like luck, or it feels like we're getting away with something. And that's very exciting and very rewarding on a neurochemical level. So we want to go back and get more. Now, if we expect it to be easy and we get hard, we experience it as difficult to do, then our inner monitor perceives the task as something that is too costly to keep going at. It makes us want to give up because this task is taking more resource to accomplish than we expected or allotted or decided in advance was worth doing the task. Most of our actions to acquire or learn are based in this subconscious calibration. I expect X to cost Y. Is X worth Y for me? And do I have Y to spare at this time? So when we go to do it, and doing the thing, whatever X is, costs us less than Y, what we expected, we feel like we got a deal. It feels good. But when doing X costs us more than what we expected, more than Y, we feel cheated or betrayed, even if the only source for that so-called betrayal was our own internal expectation. Like, where did we get Y? Where did we get that number, that amount of energy or effort or time or, whatever way we quantified our expectation for what it would cost us? Where did that come from? Was it based in anything real or just our own imagination, our own fantasy or projection? Properly calibrated expectations are based on our experiences, and they're updated in appropriate ways as we gain more experiences. This kind of updating is necessary to account for our developing competency. Like if we keep expecting a task to be as hard as it was the first time, we might get really avoidant of it, and we might not keep trying to gain additional skill with it or practice it. But if we know that as we do something more, it will get easier and we won't have to expend this much energy, after say 5 times of trying it, then that can encourage us to keep going. Similarly, if we find, this task has gotten really easy and I'm kind of bored, then we know it's time to level up our skills, to try to make it more challenging for ourselves in some way. So those are going to be the positive updating of our expectations to an experience. But we can also update our expectations inappropriately. For example, our new high score or high performance becomes the new normal or minimal acceptable, when in fact that was a peak moment and not really an expression of our average or commonly seen performance. That would be an inappropriate updating of our expectations because our skill level isn't really there yet. And so to then expect ourselves to perform at our absolute peak every single time is an unrealistic expectation of ourselves. One part of responsible self-management is to keep our skill expectations calibrated more or less accurately. And this allows us to grow in ways that match our expectations. We can present ourselves with challenges, but they are attainable challenges, not a stretch that hurts us because it's too much at once, like it's actually an overreach rather than an attainable stretch. But here's the thing. We don't get expectations only from our experiences. We also get them from messages that we absorb from other people, our family, our friends, our culture. And this is where the concept of talent that we have culturally really becomes problematic. So there's a couple ways that the narrative of talent can play out. Some of them can be useful for growth, and some of them are pretty self-limiting or even self-defeating. The most common narratives I hear about talent are, wow, what an impressive accomplishment. That took a lot of talent. Or, somewhat similarly, you're so talented. That's why you're able to do this thing. And in both of these cases, there might be an implicit assumption that this talent is why that person can do something that the speaker can't, or maybe that this talent is why that person can do something that nobody else can. It's not just the speaker. It's literally like you're so talented at this. I can't imagine anyone else being able to do that. I can't imagine myself being able to do that. So these statements can affect the observer negatively because they compare themselves to someone who has high skill development and possibly more native capacity, and then assumes that they could therefore never accomplish the same thing because they don't have this inborn talent, this immediate capacity to be good at the specific thing. The messages also affect the person receiving these compliments or supposed compliments, this talented person, because it dismisses the part that they played in their skill development by practice and discipline and learning. It reduces their achievement to basically genetic luck. So let's pull in this concept of expectations a little more explicitly. If you hear someone say, you have a real talent for X, that can be motivating if it gives you a sense of windfall. Like, oh, I wasn't expecting this to be easy, and it was, and I have a talent at it. It will continue to be easy for me. Great, I'll keep going. But it can also become a negative if that creates performance anxiety or maybe a perfectionism. Like, oh, I'm talented at this. I have to perform at a certain level in order to justify being told that I'm talented, or to live up to the expectation others have put upon me, or that this label puts upon myself, and I don't know if I can do that, and now I don't want to do the thing because what if I fail, and what if they're wrong and I'm just a fraud, I'm not talented. Or if you hear someone say, it takes a lot of talent to do that, maybe that feels demotivating for you to try to do that because you think the cost is going to be too high if you innately lack that talent, or that you maybe can't even do it at all because you don't have the talent to do it. On the other hand, this seemingly dismissive or negative messaging could actually be motivating, kind of a I'll show them determination to go out and do it anyway. So these messages of talent can be positive or negative, but they don't really reflect the reality. Because the reality is there's also this internal emotional alchemy that happens between how badly we want something and how much we expect that thing to cost us. And there's also the living it out and seeing if reality matches our expectations or if it's easier or harder than we expected. This concept of skill versus talent is one that I have lived and tested in a lot of different mediums. I am highly creative in the sense that I like creating things. I like doing things. I like learning new things. And there are a lot of different mediums of work where I have a high innate capacity and a high output. And then there are some where I don't have a high innate capacity, but I still have a high output because I've put in the time and the effort to learn. As an example of each, writing, I have a high capacity and I'm good at. Sewing, I do not have a high capacity. In fact, I have a very poor capacity for the underlying cognition, but I am still good at it. When people tell me I'm talented at sewing, I immediately correct them that it is skill. I paid for it with literal blood, sweat, and tears over, at this point, like a 14 or 15 year period. If my output is a high level, it reflects the fact that I've put in a lot of time to building the skill. You know, I've made dozens, if not hundreds of garments. I've certainly altered hundreds of garments. I have remade garments in order to make them better based on what I learned the first time through. My skills in that arena have been built piece by piece, and, you know, specific techniques have been learned for one project that I then expanded on with a different project. Sometimes I pick projects in order to showcase skills that I have, and sometimes I pick projects in order to force myself to learn new skills. But my cognitive capacity for the tasks of sewing is not actually very high. To bring type in just a little bit, that involves my inferior process, my extroverted sensing, and the fact that I have put so much time and effort into learning is a reflection of how much I wanted it. I was highly motivated. I chose to spend time and energy working against my functions in order to achieve. And, you know, even if we look at my other example of writing, which is something that I will freely admit I have a high capacity for the underlying cognitions of writing smoothly and in a complex way. Even there, I'm not going to say that my skill at writing is entirely because of my talent. I have put, at this point, 25 years into honing that skill, and I'm not going to cede all of those hours that I've spent trying to clarify my thinking, trying to put into words these feelings and perceptions to innate talent. Like, maybe my innate cognitive capacity made it enjoyable to pass the hours in that kind of way, but I still had to build the skill. So, in my opinion, talent, as we understand it, is really just capacity plus skill. Now, capacity can mean a couple things. First, it can refer to the amount of energy that we are capable of expending on a certain type of task, or in a certain type of cognition, a certain cognitive space. And that capacity is going to determine how much time we can stand to spend on something at any one time. Second capacity can refer to our sensitivity around the task or toward the task. How much nuance are we able to see? What is the depth of information that we can take in around this task or in this cognitive space? And that is going to determine how much fidelity we're going to have for the task, how closely we can reproduce reality or someone else's work or our previous efforts or this thing that we see internally and are trying to bring into the external world. So with sewing, I will admit that I probably have a high sensitivity to the task, even if I have a low time capacity to the task. So, okay, maybe I have a slight amount of talent, but seriously, it does not feel like it. The third aspect of capacity is our autotelic response to the task or to being in that cognitive space. And this is going to be how much interest or motivation we have to do that thing, like our innate enjoyment of the task or the process of problem solving around that task or learning around that task. Is it a flow state or an energy generative state for us to be in? So that's going to determine how pleasurable we find doing the thing, which is going to determine how much time we want to spend doing the thing. If you find doing something pleasurable, you're going to probably spend more time doing it. You're probably going to seek out opportunities to do it than if you don't. So if you're trying to measure talent, then you can look at your capacity in those three ways for both the task itself and any underlying skills or cognitive spaces. But in my opinion, the real determiner of high achievement is skill development, and that can be done based on determination, a desire to do the thing, regardless of your capacity. You're just going to need a different strategy if you don't have a high capacity in any or maybe all of those ways. So saying that you don't have a talent for something is really not a good excuse. You might not have enough desire to do something to overcome how difficult it would be for you to do it, but that is not the same thing as saying that you cannot do it. And by the way, I don't mean to cast any shade if you don't want to do a thing. We all only get one life, and the coins of our time are finite. It's okay to not spend the coins of your time building a skill that you have low capacity with if you don't really want that skill for some other reason. I just don't want you to be trapped by this concept of talent as a way of saying, oh, I can't build that skill, or I don't even get to try that because I don't have a talent at it. I tried it once and it didn't go well, so that's how I know it wasn't for me. No. Change that narrative and recalibrate your expectations. How hard is the thing for me to do versus how much I want it? That's the equation you need to be looking at, not whether you have this so-called talent. Talent does not exist. It is skill and capacity. So that is it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending this time with me. As always, if you would like to know more about my work as a coach, if you want to have a conversation about where your capacities might lie, you can check out thepatternbreaker.com. You can follow me on Instagram for occasional updates about podcast episodes at thepatternbreaker, or you can join my Patreon, patreon.com/narrative responsibility. And until next time, What part of your story are you going to take responsibility for this week?